This video is brought to you by Squarespace. Whether it's your new profession or just a lifelong passion, start your journey to website glory with Squarespace. Check out their awesome all-in-one platform through the link below. More on them in a bit. One of the most successful weapons of the post-Cold War era, US Air Force A-10 Warthog, is what enemy combatants fear more than anything. Only one thing can kill the A-10 Warthog, not Russia. These are all quotes taken from headlines regarding the Fairchild Republic A-10 Thunderbolt II, an aircraft which, it's safe to say, is rather well regarded by the aviation enthusiast community. Often lauded for its redundant systems and its titanium bathtub, both of which apparently make it all but impossible to shoot down, as well as its 30mm GAU 8A rotating cannon, which apparently can open up tanks as easily as a can opener opens up a can of baked beans. It is safe to say that the A-10 is a well-loved and highly praised aircraft. But does it deserve this praise? Join us today, dear viewer, as we once again go against the grain, present to yourselves contrary perspectives on another aircraft whose position in popular legacy is very much deeply ingrained. As with our F-35 video, to which today's video is very much a part 2, our purpose today is not necessarily to convince you of any particular perspective on the A-10, but once again to stress to yourself the great complexity of military analysis and how often these complicated matters are not given their due diligence or presented with appropriate nuance within the confines of the clickbait-inducing articles and headlines in which their popular image is often shaped. To do this, we're going to focus on two key elements of the A-10's legacy, namely its cannon and its combat performance, both factors in which it is not difficult to argue that the A-10 comes up lacking. And with that out of the way, let's just jump right into it, shall we? The A-10, or AX as it was known during development, was never originally envisioned to have a 30mm cannon. Contemporary wisdom of the mid-1960s saw the 20mm rounds being fired by the M3 cannon already mounted to the Douglas A-1 Skyraider as being perfectly adequate for the task of close air support, as it was able to quite happily handle soft targets, while ever more sophisticated bombs and air-to-surface rockets were seen as perfectly dependable for armored targets. This changed with the publication of the Gun System Study Group's final report in September of 1969, which recommended a 30mm hydraulically driven rotary cannon to be made the main armament of the AX. The Air Force rolled with the suggestion and, after some deliberation, settled on the GAU-8A. At face value, this appeared to be a great choice, as in testing with its main rival, the GAU-9A, the GAU-8A could fire 15,000 rounds between major service intervals compared to the 3,000 rounds of the GAU-9A had an average of 8,800 rounds between failure compared to the 846 of the GAU-9A, only required 5.9 maintenance hours compared to the 24.3 of the GAU-9A, and fired a total of up to 42,000 rounds between barrel changes compared to the 1,500 rounds of the GAU-9A. And what's more, it fired substantially bigger rounds than the 20mm systems that it was replacing, so it would pack more punch and, well, what wasn't to love? As it turns out, actually quite a lot, because while the GAU-8A was undoubtedly a better cannon than the GAU-9A it was pitted against in testing, praise of the GAU-8A in its own right is predicated upon the foundation of its fundamental premise being viable, and well, arguably, it wasn't. The shortcomings became apparent quite quickly when a trial of the new gun was undertaken on the 14th of August 1979. The trial was conducted by the Combat Damage Assessment Team, who published their findings in the snappily named Combat Damage Assessment Team A-10 GAU-8 Low-Angle Firings versus Simulated Soviet Tank Company Array 17 Aerojet. The title is an essay. The trial saw a GAU-8A equipped A-10 being pitted against Soviet T-62s, which were stowed with full ammunition loads, fuel, oil, and dummy crews. A total of 17 passes were made against the T-62s, and from 957 rounds fired, 93 impacts were scored on 6 of the 7 tanks, 17 of which were penetrated, causing 3 catastrophic kills and 2 mobility kills. Furthermore, 2 of these kills were caused by a single penetration penetration. At face value, it sounds pretty good, right? The test proved that the GAU-8A could kill Soviet tanks and seemingly do so quite happily. Or did it? Well, it turns out no. No, it didn't. For starters, all of these kills were achieved against the side and rear armor of the T-62s. The 30mm rounds of the GAU flatly could not penetrate the frontal armor, not for want of trying, however. It's just that every single round that hit the frontal armor failed to penetrate, bounced off, and subsequently failed to ruin the day of the dummy crew within. Furthermore, the hit-to-penetration ratio of the rounds that found their way to the T-62s was very low. Some would argue that this isn't a bad figure in light of the fast firing rate and decent ammo reserves of the A-10, but when a 30 by 173mm round weighs over a kilogram, at what point is it worth just carrying a different kind of ordnance rather than throwing heavy lumps of metal downrange for, well, no effect? Well, there's also the fact that this test was conducted under sterile laboratory conditions. The tanks were not moving, nor were their escorts firing back, both of which in real-world combat situations would only reduce the hit-to-penetration ratio even further. What's more, the T-62s being used as targets were obsolete by 1999, having been replaced by the improved T-72s that the US would be facing if the Cold War ever went hot, and they definitely had thicker armor. Certainly, this test would suggest that the accuracy of the GAU-8A wasn't lacking, but it ultimately was just one test. It could well enough have just been a fluke, and to really prove this point, we need other tests that arrived at the same conclusions. So, do we have other tests, I hear you cry? And the answer is yeah, sure we do. The Combat Damage Assessment Team undertook another test on the 7th of November 1979 and published their findings in the still snappily named Combat Damage Assessment Team A-10 GAU-8 Low Angle Firings versus Simulated Soviet Tank Company Array 22 Aerojet. So we have to use the full title every time. In this test, 10 M47 Patton tanks were arranged in a triangle to mimic an attacking Soviet tank formation. A single A-10 was used as the attacking aircraft, and the pilot was under orders to take 10 passes against the column and be as trigger-happy as he pleased while he was doing so. During the test, the sky was clear, the terrain was open, each of the Pattons was immobile and loaded up with lots of volatile and explosive ammunition, and the pilot was allowed to take as long as he wanted to line up the ideal attack vector. The conditions of the test could not have been better aligned to all but guarantee a favorable outcome for the A-10. I mean, it's almost as if Fairchild Republic orchestrated the tests themselves. The pilot rationed his passes out equally and made a single attack run on each tank individually and fired 174 rounds in the process, of which 90 or 51.72% impacted the Pattons, hitting 8 of them and leaving 2 untouched. Of the rounds that landed on the target, 30 achieved perforations, significant results from which include catastrophic damage to 3 tanks, 1 tank immobilized and silenced, 3 tanks immobilized only. All of these penetrating hits were against the rear of the Pattons, and later analysis concluded that all 3 of the immobilized vehicles could be made operational again in less than a day's work. If this wasn't enough, the report also speculated that had the targets been more modern M60 Pattons rather than the M47s used in the test, only 1 would have been destroyed, and had the tanks been real Soviet T-62s as per the 14th of August 1979 test, never mind T-72s, none at all would have been knocked out. These tests serve to highlight the poor accuracy of the GAU-8A. When it fires, 80% of its rounds will land within a 12-meter diameter circle, hardly laser precision. What's more, this is under perfect conditions, and it assumes that you're not trying to hit a moving target and are firing from 1.2 kilometers away. In comparison, an SDB-2 GBU-53, when fired from an F-35 or another aircraft with the right sensors, can hit a target within 1 meter from up to 72 kilometers away and will destroy or disable vehicles within a 10-meter radius. Its kill radius is going to differ based on environment, but you could easily expect soldiers to be incapacitated or killed at twice that. All of this serves to build a clear picture that the A-10 isn't as accurate and consequently as dangerous as its popular legacy would have one believe. And just to rub salt in the wound, the poor accuracy of the A-10 in the early days was hardly classified information either. The results were so damning against the A-10 that many historians consider inaccuracy to be the reason why the A-10 failed to secure any export orders. A Fairchild Republic was certainly keen to hoover up some juicy export contracts, and at one time both the UK and West Germany expressed an interest in the aircraft, interest that quickly waned and came to naught when the true inaccuracy of the A-10 became apparent. Alright, we'll get back to today's video in just a minute, but first, here's a word from today's video sponsor, Squarespace. Look, it's very easy to get overwhelmed with the internet. There's lots of complicated names and terms that most people don't really understand. Web3, blockchain, SEO, the dark web, the Internet of Things. Largely a mystery, but don't let any of that intimidate you. Contrary to popular belief, you don't have to be a web engineer to start a website. You just need an idea. And our friends at Squarespace. Squarespace is the all-in-one toolkit that helps you transform that thing that's in your head onto something on the screen in front of you. Anyone can use it successfully. I know because I've done it. It is very easy to do. And if you're someone who wants to fully customize your website, Squarespace gives you all the freedom you want to do that. You can play around with different elements, manipulate the colors, and create the exact perfect website that you want. It's brilliant. Or if you just want to jump in and get something done quickly, use one of their pre-designed templates, which are beautiful and make a website that looks amazing in very little time. So whether you want to start a blog, a business, or something in between, you could do it all with Squarespace. Go to squarespace.com for a free trial, and when you're ready to launch your new site, go to squarespace.com/megaprojects to save 10% off your first purchase of a website or a domain. And now back to today's video. Now, so far this analysis has been largely theoretical. It's all well and good giving you, the audience, lots of juicy facts, stats, and figures that imply the A-10 and its cannon aren't all they're cracked up to be, but how about in the real world? Do we have any combat history to look at which prove, once and for all, that the A-10 is an overrated aircraft? As luck would have it, well, yes. We do. As much as the Cold War never went hot and the A-10 never had to square off against the Soviet army, there were still plenty of conflicts in which the A-10 had the opportunity to be pitted against the very Soviet armor it was designed to defeat, as Soviet armor often found its way into the inventories of nations not on the US's Christmas card list. A prime example is the Gulf War of 1991, during which Iraq had an inventory of 1,850 T-55s, 100 T-62s, and 100 T-72s for the A-10 to prove its mettle against. For those in the know, at first it may look odd that we've chosen to bring up the Gulf War, when at face value the aircraft performed very well there. Indeed, the notion that the A-10 was successful in this conflict has firmly penetrated the common zeitgeist, and all you have to do is Google A-10 Gulf War, and you will be met with a stream of copy-and-paste articles which describe all manner of click-inducing feats, such as the destruction of 23 Iraqi tanks in a single day and the supposed destruction of 987 tanks in total. If, however, one analyzes these various claims and reports critically, it becomes apparent that the performance of the A-10 in the Gulf War was not nearly as laudable as first appeared. The first problem is that the aforementioned 987 destroyed tanks figure credited to 165 A-10s is fudged to such a high degree that it can be considered all but total nonsense. Misreporting and misattribution of tank kills during the Gulf War was prolific and systematic. Contemporary analysts routinely rejected claims of kills by other attack and close air support aircraft and credited them to the A-10 instead, and consequently scores were falsely attributed to the A-10, leaving its kill count grossly inflated. Depending upon who you ask, the culture of false attribution was caused either by an internal bias in favor of the A-10 by contemporary analysts, so ingrained that they simply didn't look into kills deeply enough, assuming that they must be the handiwork of the A-10, or an active conspiracy within the United States Air Force to protect their image after investing so much of their time and energy into promoting the A-10 as a viable weapons platform. Further evidence for the disappointing performance of the A-10 comes from its losses. The fact that this supposedly durable and resilient aircraft with its famous titanium tub and structural redundancies that supposedly make it one of the most survivable warplanes in the sky, had a hell of a habit of falling out of the sky when it got shot at. For starters, of the 21 aircraft that were lost by coalition forces after being hit below 12,000 feet, the very height the low and slow A-10 is supposed to excel at, 12 were A-10s. So worried was the US senior leadership about the losses the A-10 was suffering that in mid-February 1991 it was completely pulled from the heavily defended north of Iraq and relegated to the south of the country, where resistance against aerial assets was significantly lighter. In addition, the A-10 also completely stopped making daytime sorties and was restricted only to nighttime operations where, again, resistance would be lesser. Other aircraft, often operating in similar or identical roles as the A-10, such as the F-111, F-16, and Tornado, all managed to achieve similar kill ratios to the A-10 without suffering anything even approaching comparable losses. Similarly, in the Iraq and Afghanistan wars, there's a marked difference between the popular conception of the A-10 and reality. One only has to look elsewhere on this very website to bear witness to the popular zeitgeist surrounding the A-10 in these conflicts, with searches on the matter being dominated by such carefully considered and thought-provoking titles as Awesome A-10 Thunderbolt 2 compilation, A-10 Warthog sound compilation, all caps Awesome A-10 Warthog gun comparison part 2, and perhaps the most subtle of all, simply entitled I got spit all over my beard. In reality, meanwhile, we see the inaccuracy of the A-10's 11th-hour jury-rigged cannon in the procedures of the men and women it is sent to help, which is a run-and-take cover due to the damned inaccuracy of the thing. Not only did this weaken the pressure on the enemy combatants, to whom the A-10 gave a nice little reprieve for inserting a fresh magazine and catching a breather, but shockingly, it took the Taliban the whole of maybe 5 minutes to notice this pattern and begin running for cover themselves, rendering the close air support of limited utility anyway. The unfortunate fact of the matter is that the A-10 was designed to kill tanks, and it can barely do that, and even when bodged into the role of close air support, it isn't much better. Compare that to the F-35, the plane that the A-10 advocates love to malign. When flying a close air support mission, the F-35 can get there 3 times faster and actually be relied upon to hit the enemy when it arrives, as with the right sensors, it can hit to within 1 meter of a target from up to 72 kilometers away, and it will destroy or disable vehicles within a 10-meter radius. There is simply no competition between the two, proving that the A-10 is worse than you think. Look, having addressed the major downsides of the A-10, namely that it is neither as accurate nor as survivable as its popular legacy would imagine, hopefully it's now apparent, even if you completely disagree, that assessing the success of a military aircraft such as the A-10 is not a black and white matter. There are layers of nuance and complexity in the evaluation that go far beyond that which can be accurately described within the confines of a short copy and pasted clickbait article. As with our F-35 video, the purpose of today's video is not necessarily to convince you of any particular opinion regarding the video subject matter. Rather, this video is a thought exercise intended to encourage us all to be more critical when rendering our verdicts on a military aircraft. And with that in mind, let us know your opinion in the comments below. Do you think that the A-10 is overrated, or does it fully deserve its reputation?